Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. This is my first Elm conference. I haven't been to ElmConf in the US because usually the scheduling doesn't work out. So this has actually been really exciting for me to be here just in attendance. And I would also like to thank all of the organizers and volunteers again because they've done such a lovely job putting this event together for us. So cool. Hello, my name is Emma Cunningham, and I come here from Los Angeles, California in the United States. And I am a co-organizer for Write Speak Code. It's a grassroots nonprofit that provides professional development for mid to senior level women and non-binary engineers. And I also co-organize Elm LA, a local meetup in Los Angeles for people who love Elm or are curious to start using Elm. So if you have friends in Southern California, let them know about us. We actually have 2 meetups in Southern California. There's also an Elm Orange County meetup as well. I also work as a senior software engineer at a company called Second Spectrum. We're headquartered in Los Angeles. We also have offices in Lausanne, Switzerland, and Shanghai, China. And what the company does is we are the official optical tracking and analytics provider for the National Basketball Association in the US. What that means is that we install cameras, high-resolution cameras, in every stadium where NBA games are being played. And we have computer vision and machine learning software that's able to provide raw tracking and also event semantics data. So during a live game, we're able to say, given this cluster of players in a specific formation, what type of play is this? Is this a pick and roll? Is this a shot? Is this a pass? And then also being able to say certain things like, given certain artifacts around a player's position on a court, how many defenders he has on him at what distance, what's the likelihood that he would be able to make a shot if he took it right now. We use that data to create full-stack data visualization platforms that are being used right now by coaches, managers, leagues, and media broadcasters. We started off working in basketball, and we have just started working also in association football, and we have a partnership with ESPN as well. In addition to that, we've started working on developing consumer-facing products that bring these proprietary analytics to life in a live game setting. So it should play. OK, cool. What you're seeing now is an example of a live game augmentation where above each player's head, you can see if that player were to take that shot, what the probability would be for that shot going in. An alternative view, for those who are less interested in the numbers but just want to see something kind of fun, is these augmentations that appear during different kinds of actions. I think this is going to be the fireball one. Yeah. So that's what we do, and in addition to all of that, so that's what we do, and how we do it is we've started using Elm. We love Elm. We've been using it across our full-stack teams, across all of them for over a year now, and the team that I was on was the first team to start using Elm, so we've been using it for about 1.5 years. That app that I just showed you, the web browser version of it is written in Elm. And so it's really exciting that we get to do such fun work, and also with such a fun front-end language and architecture. I realize that I am incredibly lucky to do this work. I work for a company where we are encouraged to use Elm, that it is embraced wholeheartedly, which means that during my day job I get paid to write Elm, and I realize this is not always the case for people who are excited about Elm. I say this coming from a background where previously I had worked at an agency where we had very tight restrictions around what kinds of languages we could use, what kinds of frameworks, because a lot of times it was dependent on restrictions imposed on us by a client, and so we weren't always able to use some of the newer technologies that we were excited about at the agency because our clients were unsure if their engineers, once we did the code handoff, would be able to maintain those projects. So I realized that currently I'm in a position of great fortune. So today what I'd like to share with you is the journey that we went through at Second Spectrum, where my team was the first to start using Elm and how we got other teams on board across the engineering organization. So an overview of what we'll go over. So first, I'll take you through sort of our company's journey from other technologies that we'd been using on the front end all the way to Elm, and then some of the things that we've learned about how to community organize for Elm, both within your own organization and then beyond in terms of creating a meetup for your city, and some of the things that we've learned organizing for Elm LA in the past 6 months, and then we'll wrap things up with some concluding thoughts. First, first, I should explain a little bit about me. Before working in software, and I think this gives you some context for why I personally feel very passionate about Elm. Before working in software, I spent about a decade as a linguist. This is me as a graduate student in Providence, Rhode Island in the US. I was working on developing a directly compositional grammar for natural language, and some of the tools that I was using were a type lambda calculus, category theory, and combinatory logic. I'm not going to go into that anymore because this is not a linguistics talk, but if you ask me at any point during the conference, I will talk your ear off about it happily. But this was the background that I was coming from, and this was how I got into functional programming. It was by happenstance that I had a friend in computer science who said, oh, you're doing a lot of lambda calculus stuff. You do know about this thing called functional programming? And I was like, oh, no. I mean, I tried a little web development, but it wasn't that great. And so he introduced me to Scheme, and I grabbed a copy of Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs by Abelson and Sussman. I dove straight into it. I got really excited, and it was the first time I was excited about writing code. I then started learning Common Lisp, and then moved on to OCaml, and that was my introduction to programming. So you can imagine that when I started working after I left graduate school, and in my first job I was writing like just raw JavaScript, it was quite a horrendous transition. I noticed, Richard, you also used this emoji in your talk. I feel like this is now the official emoji of JavaScript, the like horror face. So after graduate school, I moved back to California, and I started working at this agency. And due to a lot of the constraints imposed by us by many of our clients, we were using vanilla JavaScript. Sometimes we were able to use external libraries, but often that was what we were allowed to use was very limiting. But at the same time, I was starting to grow fond of, in general, building front-end user experiences. I think the end product was something that was really exciting. And so, yes, I was writing for loops, and I was mutating state, and I was getting very object-oriented, and all of that felt a little uncomfortable for me coming from my functional programming background, but I just kind of thought that was the way things were going to be. Then in late 2016, I happened to just by accident find this video from Jessica Kerr about the work that she'd been doing at Atomus with Elm. I had heard about Elm before, but kind of at this point, I had become a little wary of new front-end stuff just because there's such a huge explosion of stuff. And so I became kind of like a Luddite and late adopter of things. But I was a fan of Jessica's work, and so I watched the video, and that was my introduction to Elm. It was really exciting. And I think what was really exciting to me was that there's this language that is robust and expressive, and we can use it to build amazing front-end things. And that was like really, really a fun moment for me to realize that. But I was still cautious and hesitant because of my past experiences where in the past when I had tried to introduce functional programming paradigms or languages into some of my work environments, there was a bit of resistance. There was a lot of people would say things like, oh, well, we can't do that because it'll be too hard for some of the other engineers to adopt, or it's too niche, things like that. And again, I learned about this, and then I just kind of thought, oh, shoot, well, that'll be a fun thing to work on the side. And then something rather serendipitous happened. So last year, in early 2017, I had been working at Second Spectrum for about a year developing React Redux apps, and my boss, the CTO of Second Spectrum, Jeff Su, had just returned from a week that he'd spent working from the Shanghai office. And in his free time there, he had picked up Elm and tried it out. He was particularly impressed with a lot of the features such as the tooling, and then also had played around with some of the things that are initial pain points for people new to Elm, like JSON decoding and things like that. But he was overall very excited, and he came to me because he knew that I had this real love for functional programming and front-end stuff. In particular, what he was so excited about was stuff that I think is maybe not new to anyone in this room, but the fact that the language had immutability, no nulls, type safety, and then, oh yeah, that whole no runtime exceptions thing, kind of a big deal also. So that was our entry point to using Elm at Second Spectrum was, and I know that, again, this is a rare experience to have that come from like a C-level from your CTO, but we were very fortunate that we had our CTO look into this and be excited about it. He also is the type of CTO that does not push new things on people so much as introduces you and sort of tries to see how teams want to incorporate into that workflow. So to give you a bit of background of where the team that I worked on was coming from, so the team that I work on, we work on building the analytics platforms. So we work a lot with the AI teams to ingest the raw data that are coming out of the tracking and machine learning layers. And then we create these full stack products that can be used by analysts. One of the things that we found really difficult about finding the right tools for a lot of our front-end stuff was that a lot of our products really required rapid iteration cycles because we were taking feedback in from various different stakeholders, clients, users, people on our business development team, and we often needed quick turnaround for demos that had to occur at specific times. So, for example, coinciding with NBA All-Star Weekend. That's a date that unfortunately cannot move. It's fixed on the calendar. And so what we found was, we often would have projects where we would spin up, and then it would go be demoed, and then we would wait for some feedback, but it'd be a while until we'd come back to it. And so that was sometimes a pain point, or sometimes we'd have projects that had sort of grown so big in features that continuing to maintain it was something that only a few people on our team could do, and having other people, even though they had experience in React, Redux, or whatever framework we had used, was kind of hard because there were all these like little quirks, and it wasn't always clear how things were all fitting together. Additionally, some of our contracts now come with very strict SLAs, which often requires a certain amount of guaranteed uptime. And so for all of these reasons, when we started looking into Elm, we were wondering how Elm might be able to fit into some of the constraints that we had within our workflow, and also be able to help us out a little bit. And then I will say that on the back end, part of what made this transition easy was that on our back end, we've been using technologies like Scala and Elixir. And so for some of us, the transition to Elm was actually quite easy because we were already working with some of the concepts and philosophies that you also see in Elm. So this is an example of our first Elm project, and it was actually something that we'd wanted to build, and it's a data visualization tool that is just meant to sort of expose people to basic concepts around data literacy. Something that we realized working at the intersection between sports and data science is that when you start talking about just math with people, both adults and children, you lose them very quickly. Most people say they hate math. It's their least favorite subject, but as soon as you start engaging them with the numbers behind their favorite sports, they're like on board all over again. They care about decimal points. They want to know these numbers. And so we had this idea, what if we built a tool that sort of brought to life some of these basic ideas around data science, around data literacy, understanding what a histogram is actually showing you and what some of the contextual features that can change the shape of that might be. What does a location chart really mean when we talk about a shot chart for a particular player? The problem was that we always had this idea for this, but we never quite seemed to be able to find time to just set aside a sprint or two to be able to plan out the features and build it. And so this was the first Elm app that we decided to build. We wanted to see if this was something where a few of us on the sports performance and analytics team could spend a few spare cycles over a couple of weeks and see what we could put together. And we were quite pleased with the results. Like I said, we did not dedicate a full sprint to this. We had 3 engineers working probably 2 to 3 days for over 2 weeks all told, and these were often in short bursts of time of whatever few hours we had. And one of the things that became immediately apparent was that Elm was something that we could use to be able to fit in with our kind of frenetic and chaotic work schedule, where we could hop back in, and that context switching just wasn't wasn't quite as bad. From there, we were pretty hooked. We were on board. And our next project was something that was client-facing. We used Elixir on the back end. We'd already been using that for another product for the MBA. And then we used Elm for the front end. From there, we were my team was hooked, and we realized that what we wanted to do was to share this love for Elm with everyone else in our organization. So the caveat that I'll mention right now is that this talk is about getting your organization on board with Elm, but I will admit that our particular team was in a position to do this pretty easily because of my enthusiasm for functional programming. My colleague came from a Haskell background, and then the other developer on that data visualization platform that I just showed you came from a strong Clojure background. So we were all poised to do that. And also, there were a couple of other members on our team who hadn't spent that much time with functional programming, but had just learned a bit of Elixir. So they were already sort of prepared to make that transition. However, that was our team, and not all of the other teams within engineering were in the same place or had the same composition of backgrounds. And so what we focused on as we looked to educate others within the organization about how to get on board with Elm was really leveraging the culture of learning that we had already started within the company. So even before we started using Elm, we had already created a weekly problem set group, and this was an opt-in, once an hour during the week meetup where people would come together and just work on small problem sets. The idea was that this was a way for folks to get some reps in a new language or using a new paradigm and be able to share their results with other people. So we worked through some of the problem sets from Advent of Code, from the past years of the Advent of Code project, and then also Project Euler. And so it was this made it kind of easy to start introducing people to Elm because people were already, trying out different languages and working through different problem sets. So when it came time for us to ask people if they were interested in Elm, we just brought it to the problem set group and said, hey, we've been learning this new language and we really enjoy it. Maybe you'd like to try using it for one of your next problem sets for the group. From there, once we had a few people who felt comfortable using the language and were interested in learning more, we created another internal project similar to the data visualization project that allowed people to be able to collaborate and iterate, but in short bursts of time so they could see some of the benefits that we had already seen. And then the other thing that I think really helped get everyone on board across the organization is being able to do cross-team code reviews. So even though we were building different styles of products, our team was working primarily on building products for coaching staff and managers. There's another team that works more on the consumer-facing side, and then there's another team that works more on building internal tools for the tracking operations. Despite all of those different use cases, there's a lot of learning to be done across our teams. And in particular, since my team, the Sports Performance and Analytics group, had a bit of a head start, we were also able to sort of help folks understand some of the things that we stumbled on initially. So things like, oh, how do I make a reusable component? And us having to explain, you kind of don't. So things like that. So that's how we got folks to at least feel comfortable with Elm. But again, I realized that not everyone is coming from an organization where maybe you have the support of someone at the C-level or someone, or a lot of people who are coming from functional backgrounds, and so that does make it more of a challenge when you don't have those elements in place. So looking ahead, these are some of the things that I've been thinking about just in terms in general community organizing for Elm within your organization. And first, I'd like to refer you to this excellent talk by Hannah Howard. She gave this at ElixirConf 2017. It's called Idea Scaling. And in this talk, she draws on her experiences as a community organizer, working with the LGBTQIA community, and applies those concepts to thinking ahead about how to scale and sustain the Elixir community. She's talking more about sort of the developer community as a whole, but a lot of the things she mentions in this talk are really applicable applicable also to a smaller scale, looking at individual organizations as well. I think one of the things that she points out that's a very good point is that as you approach people, it's really important to know who your audience is and know who you're addressing. And this is something that I think that I was failing to do in my earlier positions, where I was really excited about functional programming, and I wanted other people to get excited about it too, but I wasn't understanding that different people had different problems that they were trying to solve and different needs, so I was just saying things like, but everything's a function, and everyone was like, okay, so. And I think this goes back to the point that Brian raised in his talk about just understanding the needs of the people in the community. That's really important, because when you can start to cater that message to what people are trying to do, how people are trying to solve them, then it becomes a little bit more impactful. So maybe a more like Elmy way to think about it is we have all these colleagues, right? But they're not all the same. They have different roles. Some of them are managers, some of them work in business development, some of them are designers, not all of them are engineers. And how we speak to them and how we make a case for why we're using Elm is going to have to change from person to person. So while a business development person may not care about no nulls, there's a way to frame it where you can say, well, this feature of this language ensures that, you know, for your particular concerns around our ability to iterate quickly, this, you know, and be able to produce a stable product, it serves these purposes in this way. Likewise, not all engineers are the same, and not all engineers care about the same things, right? So we have people who don't care about front end at all, who think that they'll never touch front end. We have people who work on platform or data science. But I think it's actually interesting because I've spoken to a couple of people at this conference here, and I think one of the ways that you can get people interested in Elm is to reach sort of across the aisle to people who aren't traditionally front-end folks and might be working in technologies that have an overlap in philosophy or design. So for example, we had some folks at Second Spectrum who were not front-end folks, but they had worked in Scala before, right? So there's a lot of sort of philosophical overlap there. And those folks just had written off front-end because they were like, oh, pixel pushing, and like there's so much like new, and all these different frameworks. But once we showed them Elm and were able to convince them that this is a way for you to actually get into front-end and enjoy it, we had a lot of people who actually were interested in learning Elm even though they were never front-end engineers before and had never thought that they'd be interested in it. So I think Elm can be a really good gateway to front-end stuff. I think a lot of people have talked about some of the immediate impact of using Elm within your project, so I'm not going to go into all of these, but I think the one that we've seen at Second Spectrum that has really made us all quite enthusiastic about it, and what led us to wanting to start the LMLA meetup and bring this to more people, is there's a real joy, and I imagine a lot of us in this room already know this, but there's a real joy when you get to use Elm to write front-end projects. It's funny because we're now in a position where when we spin up a new project and we announce that it's going to be in Elm, you can't keep people away. People are so eager to get on it. And this is great. This is great for an organization, right? Like how great that you have engineers showing up to work eager and excited to work on building really cool things and eager about the tool that they get to use to do it. One of the other things that I was thinking about, though, is in my last position at the last agency that I was working at, we weren't always able to choose what technologies we wanted to use, and that was just a restriction that we sometimes couldn't get around. So I was trying to think about how I might talk to folks in that organization about why it still might be an interesting idea to use Elm on some of our side internal projects. And I think as I was thinking about this more, one of the things that I think has been really stunning about what's happened to the engineering organization at Second Spectrum as a whole after a lot of us started using Elm is that using a language like Elm with the particular considerations that it's taken for things like error handling and messages has really convinced a lot of engineers to think more empathetically in general about what the developer experience is. So in the past where, you know, you might have had someone sort of like write not a great error error message, and it just throws something like oops or something that's not that intuitive or insightful. Now I think a lot of us are just thinking more deeply about how we can replicate that same level of care in our own code, in our own messages, and things like that. It's also changed the way we think about front-end in general. Like I just mentioned, front-end is no longer this thing that is like completely separate from other types of engineering. It's something that we think a lot of people who haven't had background in it before can get into, which is pretty exciting. And it's also changing the way we think about engineering in general. I think Ian was mentioning in his talk yesterday about how when he started thinking about how to represent some abstractions in Elm, it gave him reason to look back at how he was doing it in Scala. And we've definitely seen that as well. Some of the things that we've been exposed to in Elm have changed the way we thought about engineering in general, outside of just using Elm in general. And I think the other thing that's been really sort of impactful about using Elm within the organization is that we've realized that writing solid, maintainable code shouldn't be hard. It should be something that brings you joy, right? Okay, so in this last bit, I'm just going to talk about sort of the work that we've been doing starting up Elm LA, some of the challenges that we face that are kind of particular to Los Angeles, and how we are trying to think through them and move forward. So we started the Elm LA meetup last fall in 2017. Once we had a group of people in the organization who were really excited about using Elm, we wanted to meet other people outside of our company. And so it seemed to make sense that we should start this meetup, but it wasn't actually until Luke moved to Manhattan Beach and like pinged the Elm LA channel, and a couple of other people also expressed interest, that we were like, oh, other people would come. Okay, cool. So we started last fall, and some of the things that we've learned are, so I think the first thing that I've learned is it's really helpful if you can have other co-organizers with you. It takes a lot of load off of like you as an individual to have to set everything up and all of that. These are my co-organizers, Zach Karuma and Anoop Kishore. Now, finding co-organizers is really easy when you work with people that are interested in the same topic, but what do you do in a situation where you may not have that at your organization, but you still want that extra support? So this is something that I learned from being an organizer for Write Speak Code, where my other co-organizers are people that I don't know, or I didn't know personally or professionally beforehand, which is if you start documenting some of the things that need to be done, like individual tasks, and make it known to people, it makes it a lot easier for people to agree to volunteer or be a co-organizer. If you just say, like on Slack, hey, we're looking for co-organizers, it's a bit vague and people may not know what they're signing up for. It might be a huge task, maybe a small task, but if you start breaking things up and communicate clearly like what some of the some of these are like 5-minute tasks, some of these are closer to like 30-minute tasks, but what we've started doing is we've started taking notes for each of our meetups of what we've done, how long things take, and we just post them as markdowns to our GitHub so people can take a look at them and sign up as they're interested. I think this has also contributed to people feeling like they are actively encouraged to be involved in the organization. This isn't something that like, you know, these 3 people from this company run and then other people come. We really want to be sure that people feel included and like they can be a part of growing the organization. Another part of this that was really important to us was making sure that we started off with a code of conduct for the group. We realized that, you know, there would be some people who already knew a bit of Elm coming in, but largely there'd be a lot of beginners who may be new to functional programming, may be new to front end. And so we wanted to make sure that we had a code of conduct in place that made it clear that this was going to be a safe space for learning and building community. And again, we wanted to be transparent about this as well. So this is also a living document on our GitHub that anyone can look at, and also anyone can submit pull requests to add, edit, or update. And then finally, I mentioned that we did want to make sure we were accessible for beginners. So we're still figuring out how to do this. We have quite a number of people who are pretty experienced who come to the meetups, and then we'll get people who are new. And I was actually talking to Richard yesterday about this, and he mentioned that in Philly, what they do is they will market like just a beginner's night to make it clear to folks who are beginners that not only are they welcome, but that there will be something for them and there will be people to help them out and get them up and running. So I think this is something that we'll be trying at our next meetup. But along with that, we also have realized that it's really important for us, especially in these early stages, for us to get to know our community. LA is big and sprawling, and so there are a lot of these other concerns, like what side of town we hold the meetup and what time and things like that. So we try to make sure that we send out a feedback form at the end of every event, so we can collect some feedback around things like, was the location convenient? Was the talk appropriate for your level? Are there topics that you would be interested in either speaking about or us finding a speaker for you? So I think the feedback form is, from the organizer's perspective, like you spend about 30 minutes creating it and then you just use the same one over and over again, but it's an invaluable tool for getting to better know your community. Okay, so to wrap up, some of the things that we've learned at Second Spectrum, both at the organizational level and at the meetup level, getting people on board, start with small internal projects. That helps the learning process be low risk, and also allows people to feel like they really can make mistakes and break stuff and experiment. And then also start with classes and workshops, starting with small problem sets, and then scaffold your way up. I think once you introduce people to some of the newer paradigms that exist in Elm, then you can start building larger applications, and also leveraging what people already know, right? So again, reach out to those people who work on only platform stuff, who are Elixir developers, because they might also be interested in Elm. And then at the meetup level, one, getting to know the needs of your community. Every city is going to be different, so these are some of the things that we learned in LA, but depending on where you're coming from and what your community is trying to do together, that might be different, right? Part of what will help you understand that is collecting feedback regularly, and then also the need to create accessible opportunities to learn and also be involved in the organization. In order to sort of grow this community, it also means we're going to have to take in a lot of people for whom a lot of these things are new, and I think these meetups are a really great way of doing that. So I'm going to end with some words from Lin-Manuel Miranda, and he's not talking about code, he's definitely not talking about Elm, but I think this kind of captures what I think is so great about Elm, and it's to engender empathy and create a world using only words is the closest thing we have to magic. And I think that is something that I have enjoyed so much about using Elm and being able to have the opportunity to use it at work on fun projects, is that I think we definitely have become more empathetic as engineers, and we have the opportunity to create magic with magic. So with that, the time to organize is now, so let's all go do it, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
Emma, you described some problems that I would be very happy to have, as in collecting feedback and organizing the community. I live in a in Gothenburg, and probably I am the only Elm user. Do you have any suggestions on how to create a community?
Yeah, so one thing that can help in terms of creating a community, so you mean outside of just work, or sort of getting people to come to your meetup, or?
If I create a meetup, no one comes.
Yes, yeah. So marketing is this thing that you're going to have to figure out, which we also had to do a little bit. And one of the things that we did was we cross-promoted with other meetups in town. So we reached out to people who ran JavaScript meetups. We also, similar to my point about reaching across the aisle within your organization to people who may not work on front end, but may work on related technologies, that also works for the meetup stuff. So in LA, for example, there's an Elixir meetup that I've gone to and have recruited some folks to come over to the Elm meetup. So if there are other meetups where you are, I think that would be a really good place to start in terms of finding other folks who might be interested, and you'll have to do a bit of helping them get started. But the cool thing about Elm, I think, is that once people dive in and do their first project, they too become part of this community organizing group. So it's a matter of just getting the first few people, and then the dominoes just fall from there. Yeah.
And if you want to announce any meetup creation, you can do it right now.
I just want to add that I think if you have like bigger city and you use meetup.com, it's very easy to create meetup, because right now I created like third meetup group, and when you create it, it's like advertised on the meetup platform. So even without creating first meetup, I have like now 75 members.
In Melbourne, you don't have a problem. Melbourne is 6 million people. Gothenburg is 500,000. So
yeah, like Warsaw is like 1.5 million, and it's very easy. So I have one question about this internal project. So how do you get ideas? What project should be created? Like.
Yeah, so the internal project that we started off with after the data visualization one was we just had a need in the office. We needed an app that was able to help us book meeting rooms. And it was this thing where like Google Calendar kind of did it, but it didn't do it just as well as we wanted to. We wanted to be able to keep track of who was supposed to be in a meeting, what the meeting was for, things like that. And so that was a kind of good use case for building this, for having this be an internal project for people who are interested in using Elm, because it exposed people to ideas around how do you consume an API, things like that. In terms of kind of finding other ideas, I think it's based on, again, like what are things within the organization that is either a tool that is needed or something that people have been talking about, have been excited to work on. It can be something as small as just like visualizing something or consuming some data and building a rankings table or something like that. I think data visualization is a really rich field because there is a lot of open data out there that you can collect. So we've done some data visualization themed stuff as well, and I think that's a place to look for ideas.
First, I would like to thank you for your advices. They are very interesting and enlightening. And I just wanted to ask if it's possible to reuse the submission forms and the stuff you have done for your meetup. Oh yeah, if you mean to be able to use them for your meetups and whatnot, or yes.
Yes, you know what? I will post the slides on my Twitter right after the talk, and then I'll also post a link to our GitHub where we have all of the resources that we use.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anything else? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Emma.